Tonight, you enter ancient Rome, where accusation becomes currency, silence becomes protection, and ordinary people slowly learn to watch themselves before the state ever needs to intervene. You will see how the empire built a culture of observation powerful enough to shape behavior without chains, without guards on every corner, and often without a single command being spoken aloud. If you find yourself drawn to these quiet systems of history, you are welcome to like, subscribe, and continue deeper into the archive. Before the sun clears the rooftops, the streets are already carrying sound from one end of the city to the other. Bakers are awake first. You pass ovens giving off heat into narrow lanes while carts move slowly toward the markets with oil, grain, fish, vegetables, and wine loaded for the day ahead. Water carriers work around the public fountains before the lines become too long. Servants move quickly between houses carrying messages, account tablets, food baskets, and instructions from households that expect the day to run properly from the very beginning. Rome depends on this rhythm. Too many people live too close together for disorder to stay small for long. The city works because routines repeat every day, and because people pay attention to what is happening around them, whether they mean to or not. That is one of the first things you notice here. People know each other's business long before they officially mean to know it. Most Romans do not live in large private homes with space separating one family from another. Much of the population lives in crowded apartment buildings stacked above workshops and street-level shops. Families sleep, cook, argue, eat, and work only a few feet away from neighbors doing exactly the same thing. Sound carries through stairways and thin walls. Open windows face each other across narrow streets. A late visitor arriving after dark may be noticed by several people before he even reaches the correct doorway. Nothing about this requires spies. The city produces information naturally because people live on top of one another. A shopkeeper standing in the same doorway every day notices who is struggling financially and who suddenly has money to spend. A porter carrying goods into different districts notices which households are receiving expensive deliveries and which ones have become quiet. A servant working inside a wealthy home hears names, schedules, concerns, and political complaints simply by moving through the rooms required for daily work. Most people are not trying to gather intelligence. They are simply carrying out ordinary responsibilities inside a crowded system where observation becomes unavoidable. This matters because Roman society depends heavily on reputation. A household known for stability and discipline may gain stronger business relationships, better marriage arrangements, and more reliable political protection. A household known for debt, scandal, or instability may begin losing support long before any formal punishment appears. Public image affects practical survival in Rome. Citizens understand this early. You can see it in how people manage themselves in public spaces. Men become more careful with political opinions when strangers are nearby. Families avoid discussing household problems where servants or clients might overhear too much. Merchants speak differently around officials than they do around trusted friends. These adjustments become routine because most people understand that words travel quickly once released into the city. The bathhouses show this system clearly. Romans gather there not only to wash but to exchange news, conduct business, and maintain social connections. Men from different professions and different ranks pass through the same rooms during the course of a day. Traders discuss shipments arriving from the ports. Legal disputes are mentioned casually between conversations about weather, grain prices, and public games. Travelers carry information from distant provinces, while clerks and officials quietly listen to what concerns people most. The bathhouse is not formally an office of surveillance, but information gathers there all the same. The same thing happens in taverns. The same thing happens at fountains where women and servants wait with water jars. The same thing happens in workshops where laborers spend long hours working side by side. Rome listens to itself constantly because daily life forces people into shared space over and over again. The empire benefits from this. Rome governs a territory far too large for direct supervision everywhere at once. Emperors, governors, magistrates, and tax officials depend on reports flowing upward through ordinary channels. Complaints must reach officials somehow. Financial irregularities must become visible somehow. Public unrest must be noticed before it grows too large to manage easily. So the state relies heavily on what citizens see and repeat. Some reports are formal. A legal complaint filed before a magistrate, a written accusation, a tax record showing missing payment. But much of the system begins informally through ordinary conversation, neighborhood gossip, household observation, and practical concern. A citizen notices unusual movement around a warehouse. A servant overhears a political argument during dinner. A merchant learns that a powerful family is suddenly selling property. Small details move from person to person until they reach somebody capable of acting on them. Written administration strengthens this process. Rome keeps records on property, taxes, census information, grain distribution, legal disputes, and military service. Clerks copy names onto tablets every day. Financial obligations are tracked carefully because the empire depends on reliable accounting to keep armies supplied and cities fed. Records give memory to the system. A missed payment does not disappear once written down. A debt connected to one name may later connect to another investigation entirely. A property transfer may reveal financial pressure inside a household before neighbors openly discuss it. Information becomes harder to bury once officials begin organizing it. Most people living in Rome are not thinking about surveillance directly while they move through their daily routines. They are thinking about work, food, family obligations, rent, business, and survival. But over time, they adapt to the environment around them. They learn what kinds of speech create unnecessary risk. They learn when to remain quiet. They learn which opinions are safer kept inside trusted circles. The city teaches these habits naturally. A young man entering public life watches older citizens manage conversations carefully around officials and strangers. A household servant learns when to speak and when to remain invisible. A merchant learns that public complaints about taxes or leadership may spread farther than intended once repeated by the wrong listener. None of this requires constant violence to maintain. Most of the pressure comes from uncertainty and exposure. Citizens understand they are visible to one another. They understand that private matters rarely remain completely private for long. So they begin managing themselves accordingly. By evening, the streets remain crowded long after darkness settles over the city. Lamps burn in apartment windows while taverns fill with workers finishing long days at docks, warehouses, and workshops. Voices drift across courtyards and stairways. Doors open and close constantly. Messengers still move between houses carrying instructions and records that cannot wait until morning. Rome never truly stops listening because the city never truly stops moving. Near the Forum, the atmosphere changes as the day grows busier. Markets still crowd the surrounding streets, but closer to the courts and administrative buildings, the movement becomes more deliberate. Clerks carry legal records between offices. Petitioners wait outside public chambers hoping to secure meetings or judgments. Lawyers gather clients beneath shaded walkways while messengers move through the crowd carrying sealed tablets connected to disputes, contracts, and financial matters. In this part of the city, information has direct value, not social value alone, practical value. A useful piece of information may damage a rival, protect a household, expose financial wrongdoing, or bring attention from somebody powerful enough to reward cooperation. The city runs partly on reputation and partly on records, but both systems depend on people carrying information from one place to another. This is where the role of the informer begins taking shape. Rome has always depended on reports and accusations to enforce law and maintain order. Large governments cannot function without witnesses, complaints, and testimony. Officials need people willing to point out fraud, corruption, tax evasion, and political danger. But over time, accusation becomes tied to personal reward strongly enough that some citizens begin treating it as opportunity rather than duty. That changes the atmosphere across the city. Once rewards become attached to accusation, information becomes something a person may trade for advancement, money, or protection. A successful accuser may receive favor from powerful officials. In some cases, confiscated property from convicted citizens helps reward those who helped expose them. A lower status citizen carrying useful information may suddenly gain access to circles of influence that would normally remain closed to him. The system creates incentives, and people respond to incentives. A wealthy Roman family may appear powerful from the outside, but wealth also creates exposure. Large households contain servants, clients, freedmen, accountants, suppliers, and political allies moving through the property constantly. More people means more chances for information to leave the house. Financial trouble, political complaints, hidden debts, family disputes, or unstable alliances may become visible long before the household realizes how much others already know. That vulnerability becomes valuable to somebody willing to use it. The informer does not always need to invent danger. Rome already contains enough rivalry, ambition, and corruption to provide real material. Political families compete constantly for influence. Merchants compete for contracts tied to state supply and transportation. Wealthy households become involved in inheritance disputes, financial disagreements, and legal conflicts that produce resentment lasting years. The system simply gives people another tool to use against one another. A former ally may decide cooperation with officials offers better protection than loyalty. A servant carrying household knowledge may speak because of debt, fear, anger, or personal ambition. A business rival may quietly pass financial information to authorities during a tax dispute. These actions do not always look dramatic while they are happening. Most begin quietly through ordinary contact between people already connected by work, family, or obligation. That is part of what makes the system effective. It operates through daily life rather than outside it. Citizens begin adjusting behavior once they understand how accusation works in practice. Public political criticism becomes more careful in crowded places. Wealthy Romans become selective about who enters private gatherings. Sensitive conversations move farther from household staff whenever possible. Letters and financial records receive closer attention because written material may later become evidence in disputes nobody currently expects. The pressure spreads slowly but steadily through social life. A merchant learns that speaking too openly around customers creates unnecessary risk. A young politician learns from older senators which subjects are safest discussed in public and which ones belong only inside trusted circles. Families become protective of household reputation because once suspicion attaches itself to a name, removing it becomes difficult. Rome remembers accusations for a long time. Written administration strengthens this memory. Legal complaints, tax obligations, census records, property transfers, and debt agreements all pass through clerks who organize and preserve information carefully. One investigation may expose unrelated problems elsewhere. A missing payment connected to one household may lead officials toward hidden financial arrangements involving several others. Records allow suspicion to spread outward. The ordinary citizen understands only part of this larger structure, but enough to adapt behavior. Most people do not become formal accusers. Most simply become cautious. They avoid unnecessary attention. They protect private matters more carefully. They learn when silence creates fewer problems than honesty spoken in the wrong place. The city teaches these lessons through observation. Citizens hear stories about confiscated estates, damaged reputations, and legal accusations tied to political disloyalty or corruption. Even people far removed from elite politics absorb the message that exposure carries danger once information begins moving through official systems. The result is a population that increasingly monitors itself. A person thinking about speaking openly first considers who may repeat the words later. A household struggling financially works harder to keep problems hidden from neighbors and clients. A political ally begins distancing himself quietly from anyone attracting suspicion. The empire benefits from this caution because citizens perform much of the regulation themselves before officials intervene directly. By late afternoon, the forum remains crowded with petitions, records, complaints, and negotiations. Clerks continue copying names onto tablets while clients wait outside government offices hoping to secure favorable decisions before the day ends. Somewhere nearby, another accusation is likely beginning through something small and ordinary, a debt, a private grudge, or a careless opinion repeated by the wrong person. Most of these moments appear harmless when they first occur. Only later does the city decide whether they matter. As the afternoon heat settles over the forum, the legal side of the city keeps moving without much pause. Clerks continue carrying records between offices while clients wait beneath shaded walkways for magistrates, lawyers, or wealthy patrons willing to hear their requests. Men stand in small groups discussing debts, property disputes, inheritance claims, and political appointments that may affect entire households before the week is finished. Most people here are not thinking about justice in an abstract sense. They are thinking about position, survival, obligation, and risk. They are trying to protect family property, maintain political relationships, avoid legal trouble, and stay connected to people who still have influence. That practical pressure changes how accusation functions inside Rome. Over time, some citizens begin treating information the same way merchants treat cargo. They study where it moves, who needs it, and what it may be worth under the right conditions. A useful accusation may bring money, protection, political favor, or access to powerful officials. Once those rewards become visible often enough, a small but important part of Roman society begins organizing itself around exposure. This is where the professional accuser starts appearing more clearly. Not every informer becomes wealthy or influential, but some learn how to build careers around legal accusation and political vulnerability. They understand how to read the mood of the city. They pay attention to which senators are falling from favor, which officials are under suspicion, and which wealthy households are showing signs of instability. That knowledge becomes valuable because Rome is rarely fully stable for long. The empire experiences constant political tension beneath the surface. Emperors die, alliances shift, military commanders gain influence and lose it again. Financial pressure spreads through important families after failed investments, grain shortages, or expensive political campaigns. Public loyalty matters heavily, but loyalty itself is difficult to measure clearly. That uncertainty creates opportunity for men willing to point toward danger. A professional accuser does not always need strong evidence immediately. Sometimes he only needs timing. A careless remark that means little during calm periods may suddenly become dangerous once political fear spreads through the government. A friendship that once looked harmless may appear suspicious after an investigation begins somewhere nearby. The system rewards people who understand these shifts before everyone else does. You can see the effect this has on public behavior. Wealthy Romans become increasingly careful about who they associate with openly. Public dinners grow more controlled when politically sensitive topics arise. Citizens learn that being connected to the wrong person at the wrong moment may create trouble later, even if no law was clearly broken. This changes how relationships operate across the city. A senator may continue speaking politely with political allies while privately calculating which friendships create risk. A merchant may distance himself from a business partner already attracting unwanted attention from officials. A household may quietly stop receiving certain visitors after rumors begin spreading through elite circles. None of this requires formal orders. People adjust themselves because they understand how exposure works. Professional accusers benefit from this atmosphere because fear itself creates demand for information. Officials want reports. Political rivals want leverage. Wealthy households want warning before accusations reach public courts. Information becomes useful long before it becomes legally proven. That usefulness gives certain informers real influence. Some accusers become known figures in the city. Their names carry weight because citizens understand what they represent. A skilled informer may know financial secrets, household disputes, political loyalties, and private opinions gathered over years of observation and contact. He may have connections to clerks handling records, servants working inside wealthy homes, or clients attached to influential patrons. The city itself helps him gather material. Rome creates very few truly private spaces. Public life depends on visibility. Wealthy men receive clients every morning. Legal disputes unfold in crowded courts. Financial records pass through many hands. Servants move constantly through rooms where important conversations happen. Information leaks naturally from ordinary routine. The professional accuser simply learns how to collect it more carefully than most people do. This weakens trust throughout elite society. Citizens understand that personal grievances, financial pressure, and political ambition may all push someone toward accusation eventually. A former ally carrying private knowledge may become dangerous after a falling out. A servant burdened by debt may begin cooperating with outsiders. A client hoping for advancement may decide loyalty matters less than opportunity. These pressures accumulate quietly over time. Rome does not become silent because of this. The city remains crowded, noisy, and social. Taverns still fill after dark. Bathhouses remain centers of conversation and negotiation. Markets stay loud from sunrise until evening, but underneath ordinary life, caution grows stronger. People learn how much of themselves should remain public and how much should remain hidden. They begin managing speech more carefully around strangers. Sensitive household matters stay inside smaller circles whenever possible. Political opinions become softer, more indirect, and more controlled once unfamiliar listeners are nearby. The system teaches restraint without needing constant punishment. Public examples help maintain this atmosphere. Citizens hear about confiscated estates, ruined reputations, forced exile, and legal accusations tied to political disloyalty or financial wrongdoing. Most people never experience these punishments personally, but they do not need to. The stories move through the city quickly enough to shape behavior on their own. A few visible downfalls influence thousands of quieter decisions elsewhere. That is part of why accusation becomes so effective as a system. It does not only punish people after problems appear, it changes behavior beforehand. Citizens begin regulating themselves because uncertainty creates fewer risks than standing out unnecessarily. The professional accuser understands this very well. He survives because the city rewards men who can identify weakness before everyone else notices it publicly. He studies reputation, timing, pressure, and fear, because those things often matter more than direct evidence at the beginning of an investigation. By sunset, legal business around the forum slowly begins thinning while clerks finish copying records and sealing documents for storage. Messengers continue carrying tablets between households even after many offices close for the evening. Somewhere nearby, another accusation is already beginning quietly through a conversation, a debt record, a damaged friendship, or a piece of information somebody finally decides may be worth using. After dark, Rome grows narrower. The crowds thin slightly, but the city still feels close. Lamps burn behind open windows while families settle into evening meals inside apartment buildings stacked above shops and workshops. Voices travel through stairways and shared walls. People continue carrying water, closing market stalls, cleaning tools, and returning home from long hours spent at docks, warehouses, and public construction sites. Very little remains completely hidden in a city built this tightly together. That affects how people behave toward one another. Most Romans spend years living beside the same neighbors, buying from the same merchants, borrowing from the same lenders, and dealing with the same landlords. They learn each other's routines without trying. They notice who is struggling financially, who suddenly receives expensive deliveries, and which households have become unusually quiet or tense. The city trains people to observe through repetition. A woman collecting water each morning sees who leaves home before sunrise and who avoids public attention entirely. A landlord notices delayed rent before anyone else hears about financial trouble. A baker learns which families are reducing food purchases long before open poverty appears. These observations are ordinary at first. But once information becomes useful inside legal and political systems, ordinary observation gains weight. This is where rivalry becomes important. Rome is full of competition. Merchants compete for customers and state contracts. Political families compete for influence and public reputation. Neighbors compete for access to patrons, stable work, and social advancement. Even inside crowded apartment buildings, status matters because stability matters. Most rivalry stays quiet. A business disagreement, a damaged friendship, a long-standing argument over property or inheritance. These conflicts often remain private for years, but they create resentment, and resentment remembers details. That memory becomes dangerous when accusation enters the picture. A former ally who knows household secrets may eventually decide to use them. A neighbor carrying private knowledge may cooperate with officials if pressure or opportunity appears. A business rival may quietly pass financial information to authorities during a dispute over taxes or contracts. The system encourages people to protect themselves first. That changes trust across the city. Citizens continue forming friendships and alliances because daily life depends on cooperation. Nobody survives Rome alone. Families need neighbors, merchants need clients, and political men need networks of support. But beneath ordinary relationships, caution slowly grows stronger. People become more selective about what they reveal publicly. You can see this clearly inside apartment districts. Large insulae pack many families into limited space where privacy remains difficult. Residents hear arguments through walls. They notice illness, debt, drinking problems, domestic tension, and unusual visitors simply because daily life unfolds so close together. Most information travels through routine rather than investigation. A servant carrying supplies upstairs overhears a conversation. A neighbor notices furniture quietly removed after financial trouble. Or a shopkeeper sees unfamiliar men visiting a household late at night. These details may remain meaningless for months or years, then suddenly, during legal disputes or political investigations, they become important. That possibility changes behavior even before accusations begin. Families learn to manage appearances carefully. Public disorder creates risk because neighbors notice instability quickly. A household trying to maintain reputation avoids visible conflict whenever possible. Merchants protect customer confidence because rumors spread through districts faster than official statements ever could. Reputation becomes a practical form of security. You also begin seeing how household workers become part of this listening system automatically. Servants move through private spaces constantly. They hear political complaints during meals, financial discussions during account reviews, and arguments between family members behind closed doors. Again, most are not formal informers. They are simply positioned near information every day. That closeness creates vulnerability for wealthy households. A servant burdened by debt or resentment may eventually cooperate with outsiders. A dismissed worker may leave carrying years of private knowledge about finances, relationships, and political opinions. The household becomes another exposed space inside the larger city. This is why Roman families place so much importance on discipline and loyalty. A stable household reflects stability outwardly. A chaotic household attracts attention. Wealthy citizens understand that private disorder rarely stays private forever once servants, clients, and neighbors begin talking. The city spreads information naturally because people remain connected through constant daily contact. You can see the effects of this in public conversation. Citizens speak differently around strangers than around trusted friends. Political complaints soften in crowded spaces. Families avoid discussing sensitive matters near servants or neighbors whenever possible. These habits become normal over time. No formal instruction is required. Younger Romans simply watch older citizens survive and begin copying the same behavior. They learn which subjects create unnecessary risk. They learn that public exposure often begins through ordinary social contact rather than official investigation. That lesson settles deeply because it proves true often enough. By midnight, the city grows quieter except for footsteps in narrow streets, distant carts near the river, and occasional voices drifting between apartment windows. Families settle into sleep only a few feet away from neighbors who already know more about their lives than they realize. Rome rests close together. And because it rests close together, the city continues listening even after the streets appear calm. Before dawn, the larger Roman homes are already active. Lamps burn in kitchens and courtyards while servants begin preparing food, carrying water, cleaning rooms, and opening storage areas for the day's work. Account keepers review tablets from the previous evening. Messengers arrive early, carrying letters from other households before the streets become too crowded. A wealthy Roman home operates more like a small institution than a private retreat. Too many people move through it each day for complete privacy to exist. This creates one of the central weaknesses inside Roman social life. The same household that gives a family status, influence, and political visibility also exposes it constantly to observation. Servants hear conversations while preparing meals. Clerks handle records connected to debts, contracts, and business agreements. Clients arrive each morning seeking favors, protection, or financial support from the head of the household. The house never fully closes itself off from the city. That means information rarely stays contained inside it for long. Roman political and business life depends heavily on domestic space. Important meetings happen during meals. Alliances are strengthened through household visits. Financial negotiations take place inside private rooms where servants continue moving in and out, carrying food, wine, documents, and instructions. The people serving these households become part of the listening structure automatically. A servant pouring wine during dinner may hear political complaints spoken too freely after several hours of drinking. A household accountant may notice growing debt long before outsiders become aware of financial trouble. A doorkeeper may recognize that former allies have quietly stopped visiting after a legal investigation begins elsewhere in the city. These observations do not always look important at first. Over time, they become valuable. That value creates pressure throughout the household. Wealthy Romans understand that their homes contain many people who know private details about family life, finances, and political relationships. A trusted servant may remain loyal for decades. Another may eventually become vulnerable to debt, resentment, fear, or outside influence. The risk never fully disappears because the household depends on labor to function. The larger the household becomes, the more difficult secrecy becomes. You can see this in how carefully elite families manage sensitive information. Important financial records remain under close supervision. Certain discussions move into smaller rooms away from most servants. Household members become selective about which clients or political allies are received openly and which are handled more quietly. These are practical habits developed through experience. Rome teaches wealthy families that exposure often begins inside the home itself. Architecture contributes to this problem. Many Roman houses are built around central courtyards connected to multiple rooms where movement remains constant throughout the day. Sound carries easily through these open spaces. Servants, guests, tutors, children, clients, laborers, and business associates pass through the same areas repeatedly. A household may own expensive furniture, imported marble, painted walls, and private gardens, but it still struggles to create true isolation from observation. Daily life keeps too many people moving through the structure. That movement produces information naturally. You also begin seeing how dependent wealthy Romans become on carefully managed loyalty. Trusted freedmen often oversee finances, correspondence, or business operations because families need reliable people handling sensitive material. Some freedmen rise to positions of considerable influence inside households precisely because trust becomes such an important resource. But even trusted people carry risk. A freedman burdened by personal debt may eventually become vulnerable to pressure from rivals or officials. A servant angry over punishment may repeat household conversations elsewhere. A client disappointed by lack of support may begin sharing information quietly with political enemies. The system constantly tests loyalty because the system rewards useful information. This changes how families interact internally. Public calm becomes extremely important. Visible disorder inside a household may damage reputation outside it. Wealthy Romans therefore work hard to maintain discipline, structure, and controlled appearances even during periods of private tension. A household that appears unstable attracts attention, and attention creates danger. You can see this most clearly during periods of political uncertainty. When emperors become suspicious or investigations begin spreading through elite society, wealthy households often become quieter and more controlled. Sensitive political conversations shrink into smaller, trusted circles. Written correspondence receives greater protection. Visitors are screened more carefully. The household begins defending itself against exposure. Ordinary citizens living in smaller homes absorb similar habits on a different scale. Families sharing crowded apartment buildings learn quickly that neighbors hear more than expected. Financial problems become visible through missed rent, reduced food purchases, or arguments carried through walls and stairways. Privacy remains difficult at every social level in Rome. That reality shapes behavior constantly. A merchant avoids discussing debt near customers or neighboring shopkeepers. A laborer becomes careful about political complaints in taverns where strangers are present. Families protect internal problems because they understand how quickly gossip spreads through tightly connected neighborhoods. The city teaches caution through repetition. You also begin noticing how servants themselves live under pressure inside this environment. Household workers possess valuable information, but little security. A servant overhearing dangerous political opinions may fear punishment for speaking openly and punishment for remaining silent if questioned later by officials or rivals. This creates constant tension inside larger homes. Workers learn to read moods carefully. They notice which political visitors create anxiety. They notice when financial pressure affects household routines. They notice which subjects disappear from conversation once unfamiliar listeners enter the room. The entire household adjusts itself around risk. That adjustment becomes normal over time because the system rewards families that survive quietly and punishes those that become publicly exposed. By evening, lamps burn across courtyards while servants clean dining rooms and store records for the next day. Doors close gradually against the noise from surrounding streets, while messengers continue arriving with late instructions or correspondence that cannot wait until morning. Inside the household, people lower their voices naturally around certain subjects, not because silence has been ordered, because experience has taught them how easily information travels once it leaves a room. By midday, the forum is crowded with men trying to remain visible without attracting the wrong kind of attention. Senators move through public spaces surrounded by clients, messengers, and political allies, while petitioners gather near government buildings hoping to secure meetings, legal judgments, or financial support. Roman politics depends heavily on appearance. That creates a difficult balance. A man hoping to gain influence cannot disappear from public life. He must attend ceremonies, receive visitors, appear in courts, maintain relationships, and remain visible enough that people remember his name and position. Public absence creates suspicion almost as quickly as public scandal. Visibility creates power in Rome, but visibility also creates vulnerability. The more influence a person gains, the more carefully others watch him. Rivals notice which households he visits regularly. Clients notice changes in his financial condition. Officials pay attention to political alliances, public speeches, and social connections that may later become important during investigations or shifts in imperial favor. Nothing remains entirely separate from politics once a person reaches high status. Family relationships become political, business arrangements become political, public friendships become political. Even silence may eventually become political under the wrong conditions. This creates enormous pressure inside elite society. Wealthy Romans spend years managing public behavior because reputation affects survival as much as ambition. A senator who appears too independent may attract suspicion. A senator who appears too eager for favor may attract distrust. The safest position is often difficult to identify clearly. That uncertainty shapes nearly every part of political life. You can see it during public gatherings where experienced officials choose words carefully even when speaking among allies. Political criticism becomes indirect. Sensitive subjects disappear once unfamiliar listeners move nearby. Men who privately dislike imperial decisions may still publicly support them because visible loyalty matters heavily in maintaining safety. This does not always mean citizens believe what they say publicly. Often it means they understand the risks attached to speaking too openly. Political conditions in Rome change constantly. One emperor may tolerate criticism that another treats as dangerous. A political alliance useful today may become a liability after military defeat, financial crisis, or succession conflict. Citizens learn that stability depends partly on reading these shifts before consequences become visible. That encourages self-monitoring long before officials intervene directly. A senator may avoid attending certain dinners because association itself creates risk. A wealthy merchant may distance himself quietly from unstable political figures before accusations spread further. Families connected through marriage may begin limiting contact with disgraced relatives to protect their own standing. These adjustments become normal survival habits. You also begin seeing how dependent emperors are on information networks surrounding them. No ruler can personally observe the Senate, provincial governors, military leadership, tax officials, and urban population directly. Emperors rely on reports flowing upward through advisors, informers, clerks, political allies, household servants, and legal officials. That dependence gives enormous value to citizens capable of supplying useful information. Political loyalty therefore becomes something constantly observed and constantly performed. Public ceremonies, speeches, honors, and visible displays of obedience all help reinforce stability because the government depends partly on appearance to maintain control. Citizens understand this clearly. A senator appearing too close to a disgraced official may create suspicion even if no direct wrongdoing exists. A public absence during important ceremonies may raise questions. A poorly timed financial transaction may attract unwanted attention if investigators are already looking elsewhere inside the same network of relationships. The city connects details quickly once pressure begins building. That is one reason political life becomes exhausting for many Roman elites. Every visible relationship carries possible consequences later. Every public appearance may eventually be interpreted differently depending on future events. The uncertainty never fully disappears. You can see the effects of this in how carefully experienced Romans manage ordinary social routines. Political conversations become narrower in crowded spaces. Public disagreements remain restrained. Wealthy households become selective about guests during unstable periods. Most people are not trying to appear dramatic or mysterious. They are trying to survive inside a system where exposure carries real cost. This pressure extends outward beyond senators and magistrates. Merchants tied to state contracts become cautious because political scandal may destroy business relationships overnight. Clients dependent on wealthy patrons become cautious because their income depends on remaining connected to stable households. Entire networks of people adjust behavior around political uncertainty. The empire benefits enormously from this caution because citizens regulate themselves socially before formal punishment becomes necessary. Public examples of ruined reputations, confiscated estates, and political investigations remain visible long enough to influence thousands of smaller decisions elsewhere in the city. A few public downfalls encourage widespread restraint. That restraint becomes part of the political structure itself. By evening, the forum begins thinning while officials finish meetings and clerks seal records for storage. Clients drift back toward taverns, apartment districts, and household obligations after another day spent managing appearances, alliances, and risk. Tomorrow, the same process begins again. The same careful speech, the same measured behavior, the same quiet calculations about loyalty, visibility, and exposure inside a city where politics reaches into nearly every public relationship. By the time evening approaches, much of the legal business around the forum begins slowing down, but the movement of information does not slow with it. Messengers still carry tablets between households. Clerks finish copying records before storage rooms close for the night. Political clients wait outside homes hoping for private meetings after public business ends. This is the environment where the professional informer becomes most useful. The delator survives because Rome creates conditions that reward men willing to expose weakness. He does not need formal authority to influence people. Often, he only needs access to information and a reputation for knowing how to use it. That reputation alone changes behavior around him. Citizens become careful when certain men enter the room. Political conversations narrow, financial discussions become quieter. A known informer may not even speak much publicly, but people understand what he represents. He represents risk becoming visible. The city teaches this lesson repeatedly. Wealthy households watch careers collapse after accusations spread through legal and political networks. Property is confiscated. Political allies disappear quietly. Former friends distance themselves to avoid becoming connected to danger themselves. Most Romans never experience these punishments directly, but they see enough examples to understand how quickly exposure may spread once investigations begin. That understanding gives the informer leverage. You can see why some men are drawn toward this role. Rome is a society built heavily on status and family connection. A citizen born without major wealth or political influence may spend years struggling to gain access to important circles. But a man carrying valuable information may suddenly become useful to powerful officials. Information becomes another route toward influence. A successful accusation may bring financial reward. It may bring political protection. It may allow a lower status citizen to enter relationships with magistrates, lawyers, and imperial officials who normally would never notice him. That possibility keeps the system active. Professional accusers study pressure carefully because pressure creates opportunity. They pay attention to political instability, financial trouble, inheritance disputes, military failures, and changing imperial favor. A household under strain becomes easier to expose. A senator losing allies becomes more vulnerable. A merchant tied to unstable contracts becomes easier to investigate. The informer survives by identifying weakness before others react openly to it. This does not always require false accusations. Rome already contains enough rivalry, debt, corruption, and political fear to provide real material. The system becomes dangerous because legitimate investigations and personal ambition often blend together until separating them becomes difficult. A citizen may accuse another man partly from duty and partly from self-interest. The courts do not always distinguish between the two clearly. You also begin seeing how deeply connected the informer becomes to ordinary social networks. He depends on servants, clerks, clients, business partners, neighbors, and household workers who carry information through daily routines. Rome produces a constant flow of small observations that may later become useful once connected together. A servant notices hidden financial pressure. A clerk notices unusual property transfers. A client overhears political complaints during dinner. Individually, these details may seem unimportant. Together, they may build the beginning of a legal accusation. That is one reason trust weakens gradually across elite society. Citizens understand that private information rarely stays fully private once enough people become aware of it. Relationships therefore become more cautious. Political allies remain useful, but usefulness and trust are not always the same thing. The pressure encourages people to protect themselves first. A former friend may cooperate with investigators if he believes refusal creates greater danger. A household servant may repeat private information to gain favor or protection elsewhere. A political client may shift loyalty quickly when power changes direction. The informer understands these pressures because he depends on them. Fear, debt, resentment, and ambition all help move information through the city. Rome does not remove these instincts from society. It builds systems that make use of them. That is part of what makes the atmosphere difficult to resist. The informer rarely appears separate from ordinary life. He moves through the same bathhouses, courts, taverns, and political gatherings as everyone else. He often looks like any other Roman citizen conducting business in public. But citizens understand that certain men know how to turn ordinary details into legal danger. That awareness changes social behavior long before formal accusations appear. You can see it in how wealthy households manage access to private spaces. Sensitive political discussions become smaller and more controlled. Financial records receive greater protection. Public criticism softens around unfamiliar listeners because nobody knows exactly where information may travel once repeated through enough people. The uncertainty itself becomes powerful. A person does not need proof that someone nearby may become an informer later. He only needs to believe the possibility exists. That possibility shapes behavior every day. Professional accusers themselves remain vulnerable too. Rome may reward them temporarily, but it rarely trusts them completely. Citizens fear them because they expose private weakness. Political officials use them when useful and discard them when political conditions change. The informer lives inside the same atmosphere he helps create. A man protected during one emperor's reign may become exposed during the next. Political moods shift constantly. Citizens remember which informers helped destroy reputations and fortunes, and resentment follows those men through the city for years afterward. Still, the rewards remain attractive enough that new accusers continue appearing generation after generation. The structure encourages them. You also begin noticing how ordinary citizens absorb lessons from this environment, even when they never participate in formal accusations themselves. A merchant hearing stories about successful informers becomes more careful publicly. A family protecting financial stability becomes quieter about household problems. Young politicians study experienced senators and learn how carefully public speech must be managed. The city trains caution through observation. That training becomes part of daily life slowly enough that many people stop noticing it consciously. Public restraint begins feeling normal. Silence around certain topics begins feeling responsible rather than fearful. The system settles into routine. By nightfall, taverns and bathhouses remain busy while conversations continue moving carefully around politics, money, and public reputation. Rome stays crowded and social, but beneath ordinary interaction runs a steady awareness that somebody nearby may always be listening with practical interest rather than simple curiosity. Late at night, the city finally begins quieting in stages. Market stalls close one by one while workers return through narrow streets carrying tools, food, and water toward crowded apartment buildings. Lamps burn behind windows where families settle into evening routines only a few feet away from neighbors doing exactly the same thing. Even now, people remain careful about what they say. That caution has become ordinary. Rome does not create silence through constant visible force. Most citizens are never dragged into public courts or accused formally. Most households continue operating normally year after year without direct interference from officials. But people still learn restraint because uncertainty changes behavior long before punishment appears. The city teaches this lesson through repetition. Citizens hear stories about investigations tied to careless remarks, political associations, financial disputes, or household information repeated by the wrong person. Public examples remain visible long enough to shape behavior across entire neighborhoods. A ruined reputation may influence thousands of quieter decisions elsewhere. That is one reason soft fear becomes so effective. Citizens begin regulating themselves because they understand how exposure works. A man speaking publicly in a crowded bathhouse considers who may repeat his words later. A family discussing financial trouble lowers its voice naturally around servants or neighbors. A merchant avoids unnecessary political complaints while customers and strangers remain nearby. Most people simply decide that caution creates fewer problems. You can see this process clearly among experienced Romans. Older citizens rarely need formal warnings about dangerous speech because years inside the city have already taught them which subjects carry risk. They understand that information rarely remains inside one room for long once enough people hear it. That understanding spreads quietly from one generation to another. Young men entering public life watch senators manage conversations carefully. Household servants learn when silence protects them better than involvement. Merchants observe how quickly rumors damage business relationships once financial or political instability becomes public. Nobody needs to explain the full system directly. People learn by watching consequences unfold around them. Over time, this changes the rhythm of conversation across the city. Public speech becomes flatter around sensitive topics. Political criticism softens into vague complaints rather than direct attacks. Citizens begin separating private thought from public expression because public expression carries practical risk. This does not mean Romans stop disagreeing privately with authority or political conditions. It means many decide disagreement is safer, kept inside trusted circles. You also begin noticing how silence affects relationships themselves. Citizens continue forming alliances, friendships, and business partnerships because daily life requires cooperation. But uncertainty weakens openness gradually. A friend today may cooperate with officials tomorrow if pressure grows strong enough. A servant carrying household secrets may repeat them later for reward or protection. A political ally may distance himself quickly once suspicion begins spreading. Most people respond to this uncertainty by limiting exposure rather than confronting it directly. They may reveal less. They may speak more carefully. They may also avoid any unnecessary risk. These adjustments become habits after enough years inside the system. The city encourages this naturally because practical people usually choose stability over danger. Most citizens want reliable work, food, family security, and predictable routines. They do not benefit from attracting political attention unnecessarily. Rome uses this instinct effectively. The empire saves enormous effort once citizens begin monitoring themselves voluntarily. Families teach restraint. Political allies teach restraint. Wealthy households teach restraint to younger generations preparing to enter public life. The city carries the lesson forward socially without requiring constant intervention from above. You can see the results in crowded public places after dark. Taverns remain busy, but political discussions become guarded once unfamiliar listeners move nearby. Apartment residents lower voices around sensitive household matters because walls carry sound too easily. Even silence itself begins carrying meaning. A household suddenly becoming quiet after public scandal attracts attention. Former political allies avoiding one another publicly attracts attention. Citizens notice these changes because they are already watching carefully for signs of instability around them. The atmosphere encourages constant interpretation. That interpretation becomes exhausting over time, especially for wealthy or politically connected Romans whose reputations affect entire networks of clients, business relationships, and family alliances. Every visible relationship carries possible consequences later if political conditions change suddenly. This pressure encourages emotional distance between public identity and private opinion. Citizens learn to present safe versions of themselves publicly while protecting genuine thoughts more carefully. That separation becomes normal after enough time. You also begin understanding why silence often appears responsible rather than fearful inside Roman society. Speaking cautiously may protect not only the individual but also the household, clients, business partners, and relatives connected to him. One careless statement may spread risk outward through many lives. Most people decide the risk is not worth it. By midnight, the city grows quieter, except for footsteps in stairways, distant carts near the river, and occasional voices drifting across shared courtyards. Families settle into sleep behind thin walls, while neighbors remain close enough to hear movement from the next room. Inside many of those homes, opinions remain unspoken, not because people stop thinking, because experience has taught them that silence often survives longer than honesty once information begins moving through the city. Before sunrise, workers are already gathering near the river warehouses where grain shipments arrive from across the empire. Laborers unload cargo while clerks prepare records beside storage buildings guarded by a relatively small number of officials and soldiers. Carts move steadily through narrow streets, carrying food toward bakeries and markets that must open on time if the city is going to function properly that day. The number of guards present tells you something important about Rome. The empire cannot control a population this large through force alone. There are too many people, too many districts, too many households, and too many daily interactions happening at once. Soldiers can punish visible disorder, officials can investigate major crimes, magistrates can issue judgments. But none of that would be enough by itself to manage a city of this size if ordinary citizens were not already regulating much of their own behavior. That is where soft fear becomes useful. Most Romans never experienced direct punishment personally. Most are never arrested, publicly accused, or dragged before a court. Daily life continues normally for the majority of the population. Markets stay crowded. Taverns remain open. Construction crews repair roads, walls, and aqueducts. Families continue raising children, running businesses, and paying rent. The system works because citizens understand what may happen if they attract the wrong kind of attention. That understanding shapes behavior before force becomes necessary. You can see this in how carefully people manage public speech. A merchant discussing taxes in a crowded marketplace chooses words differently once unfamiliar listeners move nearby. A politically connected household avoids open criticism during large dinners where servants, clients, and guests continue entering and leaving the room. Nobody needs to threaten these people directly at that moment. Experience has already taught them caution. That caution spreads socially. Younger citizens watch older people survive by managing conversations carefully and avoiding unnecessary exposure. Families teach restraint because family stability depends partly on reputation. Business owners teach restraint because rumors and investigations may destroy customer trust very quickly. The city carries pressure through ordinary routines. Rome benefits enormously from this because social caution reduces the need for constant visible enforcement. Citizens begin solving part of the empire's control problem themselves. They avoid unstable alliances. They protect household information. They limit risky speech around strangers. Most of the time they do this voluntarily because practical survival encourages it. You can see how efficient this becomes during periods of political instability. Rumors of investigations spread through elite society and public conversation changes almost immediately. Political gatherings grow more careful. Households narrow sensitive discussions to smaller circles. Public criticism becomes softer and less direct. The city adjusts itself before large-scale force ever appears. That adjustment saves the empire enormous effort. Maintaining constant military control over a city this large would require impossible numbers of soldiers and officials. Social pressure, uncertainty, and self-monitoring are far cheaper and often more effective. A person who begins regulating himself voluntarily may continue doing so for years without direct supervision. That is the real strength of soft fear. You also begin noticing how decentralized this system really is. Rome does not rely only on formal spies or organized secret police. Ordinary people carry much of the observation naturally through daily life. Neighbors notice unusual behavior. Servants overhear conversations. Clerks compare financial records. Clients carry information between households. Merchants exchange rumors across districts and marketplaces. Each person holds only small pieces of information, but together they create a steady flow of awareness moving through the city constantly. That flow changes how citizens think about visibility itself. A person does not need certainty that someone nearby may repeat his words later. The possibility alone often becomes enough to encourage restraint. Citizens understand that information may travel in unpredictable directions once released publicly. That uncertainty creates pressure even during peaceful periods. You can see the effects in how carefully politically connected Romans manage ordinary routines. A senator becomes selective about public appearances during unstable times. A wealthy merchant distances himself quietly from controversial figures before accusations spread further. Families monitor household servants more carefully when political conditions worsen. These actions are not dramatic. Most happen quietly through small adjustments repeated day after day. The system depends on those small adjustments. Rome does not need every citizen to feel terrified constantly. It only needs enough uncertainty to encourage practical caution. Most people simply want stability. They want food prices to remain manageable, work to continue, and family life to remain secure. The empire uses that instinct effectively. Citizens begin avoiding unnecessary risk because risk threatens ordinary life more than most people are willing to tolerate. Public restraint, therefore, becomes associated with maturity and intelligence rather than weakness. A careful man survives longer. That lesson spreads naturally. You also begin understanding why visible punishment still matters, even inside a system built mostly on social pressure. Public examples reinforce memory. A confiscated estate, a ruined political career, or a widely discussed accusation reminds the population what exposure may lead to if circumstances shift badly enough. The city remembers these examples for years. Stories about investigations and political downfalls continue moving through taverns, bathhouses, and apartment districts long after specific events end. Citizens repeat them because the stories help explain how the system works. A few visible punishments influence thousands of quieter choices elsewhere. That influence reaches ordinary citizens too, not just elite households. Laborers avoid drawing legal attention unnecessarily because court involvement threatens income. Merchants protect reputation carefully because rumor spreads faster than correction. Families avoid conflict with neighbors and landlords whenever possible because stability matters more than public confrontation. The pressure touches nearly every layer of urban life. By evening, workers move back through crowded streets carrying tools, bread, and water after another day of labor. Public fountains remain busy while taverns fill again with conversation, complaints, and negotiation. The city still feels alive and social. But beneath ordinary activity, thousands of people continue making small calculations constantly. Who could be nearby? What information should remain private? Which subjects are worth discussing openly? How much visibility is safe? The soldiers alone could never manage all of this. The atmosphere does much of the work for them. Late at night, Rome grows quieter without ever becoming fully silent. Lamps burn behind apartment windows while footsteps continue moving through narrow streets below. Somewhere near the river, laborers are already preparing for the next morning's deliveries before most of the city has gone to sleep. The routines never fully stop, and after enough years inside this environment, the pressure created by the system no longer needs to come only from outside authorities. Citizens begin carrying it inside themselves. That is where Rome's surveillance culture becomes strongest. Not in the courts, not in the records, not even in the informers. The strongest part of the system lives inside habit. You can see it in how automatically people begin regulating themselves after spending enough time inside the city. A citizen entering a crowded room notices unfamiliar listeners before speaking freely. A household discussing financial or political problems lowers its voice naturally around servants or guests without anyone formally requesting caution. The adjustment becomes instinctive. That instinct develops slowly through repetition and observation. People watch careers collapse after accusations spread through political networks. They hear stories about confiscated property, ruined reputations, and households damaged by information that moved farther than expected. Most citizens never experience these disasters directly, but they do not need to. Memory carries the lesson forward. Rome teaches caution socially. Children grow up watching parents manage conversations carefully around strangers. Young politicians learn from older senators how much public speech should remain controlled. Merchants observe how quickly rumor damages business relationships once instability becomes visible. Nobody sits down and explains the entire structure formally. The city teaches this structure through daily life. That makes the system durable because habits survive longer than direct force. Citizens begin regulating themselves even when officials are nowhere nearby. Public restraint becomes normal. Silence around sensitive subjects becomes normal. Careful management of reputation becomes normal. Over time, many people stop noticing how much of their behavior has adapted to the environment around them. You can see this clearly in the separation between public identity and private thought. Citizens continue participating in social life, politics, business, and family obligations, but they become selective about which parts of themselves remain visible publicly. A senator may privately distrust imperial decisions while publicly supporting them. A merchant may quietly fear financial collapse while outwardly appearing stable and successful. A household facing internal tension may still present calm discipline to neighbors and clients. The city rewards controlled appearances. That reward shapes behavior across generations. You also begin noticing how difficult genuine trust becomes inside a system built around exposure. People continue forming friendships, alliances, and business relationships because daily life requires cooperation. But uncertainty never fully disappears. A friend carrying useful information may eventually decide self-protection matters more than loyalty. A servant may repeat private matters if debt or pressure grows severe enough. A political ally may distance himself quickly once investigations begin spreading through connected households. Most citizens respond to this uncertainty by limiting exposure rather than resisting the system directly. They reveal less, they speak carefully, and they avoid unnecessary risk whenever possible. That caution isolates people gradually, even while they remain surrounded by crowds. A person may move through packed streets, busy bathhouses, and crowded markets every day, while still protecting large parts of his thoughts from public view. The atmosphere encourages internal separation. That separation benefits the empire because isolated citizens are easier to manage than tightly connected groups built around open trust. Public suspicion weakens coordination. Self-monitoring weakens open disagreement before it grows large enough to become collective action. The system does not eliminate resistance completely. It simply makes resistance harder to organize safely. You can see why this becomes so effective over time. Rome does not need endless visible violence if ordinary citizens already understand where danger may begin. The possibility of exposure shapes behavior before punishment becomes necessary. That possibility spreads farther than soldiers ever could. Most Romans simply want stable lives. They want reliable work, predictable food supplies, functioning households, and safety for family members. The empire uses this practical instinct constantly because practical people usually avoid risks that threaten ordinary stability. The city therefore governs partly through expectation. Citizens expect that information may travel. They expect that public reputation matters. They expect that careless speech may eventually return in dangerous ways. Those expectations become part of daily thinking. You also begin understanding why soft fear often lasts longer than open terror. Constant violence exhausts governments and populations alike. Habit, uncertainty, and social caution are more sustainable. Citizens carry them forward voluntarily once they become normal enough. That is what makes the system so difficult to fully escape. Even in private moments, people continue measuring visibility, risk, and trust automatically because years inside the city have trained them to think that way. By the final hours of the night, Rome grows quieter again before another day begins. Bakers prepare ovens. Clerks organize tablets for the morning. Messengers sleep only briefly before returning to the streets at dawn. The city will wake and begin listening again, through neighbors, through households, through records, and through rivalry, through ordinary people carrying information from one place to another without always realizing how much weight it holds. And beneath all of it, The empire continues surviving not only through armies, laws, and officials, but through the careful habits that citizens slowly build inside themselves after years spent living under constant observation. The streets grow quieter now as the last lamps burn behind shuttered windows across the city. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, water still moves slowly along the river, while footsteps fade into the darker roads between the apartment blocks. The conversations you passed tonight settle back into silence, but the feeling of observation remains woven quietly into the life of the city. Here in the archive, even the smallest systems shape the lives of entire worlds. If this quiet journey through history brings you rest, you are welcome to return again.